Hey everybody, welcome to Trading the Close. My name is Gareth Soloway, and what a day on Wall Street. Heck, what a weekend, even in crypto. Crypto prices crashing down. We did get a little bit of a bounce today. We're going to look at some of those charts, but really it all carried into the NASDAQ and the S&P today following what happened in the Nikkei overnight. Nikkei down over 12%. I'm going to be watching, as I'm sure a lot of you all will be tonight when the Nikkei stock market opens for trading. Where does it go? We'll take a look at that chart in just 1 second. All right, so big day on Wall Street. Markets are off of their lows, but not by a ton. We have to see where things are likely headed. All right, jumping into the charts here, or at least into the heat map, we can see that the Dow is down 950 points. That is a massive move down for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. NASDAQ down 615 points, 3.65%. The S&P is down 2.9%. Now, just a marker here, the NASDAQ was down over 6% going into the open today. So it has recovered sizably, but is still down more than half of what it was earlier today. Oil down 40 cents. That actually recovered decently off the lows, as did gold. Gold was down much more earlier today, down $34 on the day now. And Bitcoin crushed, but off of its lows as well, got below 40, below 50,000 today before staging a recovery, bouncing back to 53. Look at this heat map, guys. This is about as ugly of a heat map as you're ever going to see in the stock market. Almost no green. Looks like there's just tiny bits of green here and there. I'm just curious, what is that on the charts? Let's see exactly what is green. It's AMD. Yep. Traded that today, guys. In fact, we actually bought that today in smart money stocks, and we actually sold it already for over a 10% gain. This was trading in the low 120s, and it is green on the day. So that's pretty darn cool there. Very cool to see in terms of green and members in smart money getting a bid and ultimately making money on that. All right. So when all is said and done, markets look again like they will close sharply lower, but off of their lows of the day. Let's flip into the charts today. This is your intraday S&P 500. You can see we opened all the way down here, and that was even off of our pre-market lows. What a rally took place here, not even close to getting back to the flat line, but look at how it's faded throughout the day. Now, let's talk psychology here. Why is the market fading towards the end of the day? Why in the second half of the day, see here from this high, we've generally trended to the downside. So let's talk psychology, human psychology. So what ends up happening is when you get an event like this where overnight the futures get wrecked, all right, and it's due to the Nikkei, for instance, among other things, what ends up happening is that buyers, either short coverers or buyers, come in early. But by the second half of the day, people start thinking, wait a minute, do I want to hold this position overnight when the Nikkei could drop another 12% or 10% or 5% or whatever it may be? And so there's generally some profit taking that takes place in the second half of the day. That's human psychology 101 of being worried about what could happen overnight. People are scared. The VIX tells us that. The VIX, again, still at 40, although highly off of its highs of 60 and change. So that is why we're seeing kind of some end of day fading just a little bit. Now, we are getting a little bit of a pop here at the close, a small uptick, maybe a little short covering. Smart money, honestly, is buying. I would be a buyer here because I always think the fear is worse than it. I actually have the Nikkei potentially bouncing if we just open a little bit lower. So my guess is Nikkei will open around 30,000 tonight, and then you'll actually see a technical bounce. Huge area right here around 30,000 on the Nikkei. That should be major. I repeat, major, major technical support. If it does break that, then you have additional support at this 29,000 level. But I don't think, listen, it could dip down there. I mean, anything could happen. But in general, I think you get a bounce off of this zone right here, and the bounce could be as much as a 5 to 10% bounce in the Nikkei over the course of a few days to a week or two. So just be ready for that. If that does happen, you could be looking at a futures market overnight in the US that is actually very sizably green. All right. Speaking of the VIX, take a look at this, guys. Anytime the VIX gets this high, you're likely near some sort of short-term bottom in the markets. Notice the pullback on the VIX from 65 all the way back below 40. That's very normal. If we go back to COVID in 2020, it did get higher, but remember, people literally thought the world was ending there. So it only got as high as 85, but look, that was one of the best buying opportunities of the younger generation. mean, it was an incredible buying opportunity, right? And so ultimately what happened is the VIX came all the way down and then finally bottomed out. Here's your next pop. So in general, what I've learned is that when the VIX goes very, very high, you actually start to buy. You buy into that fear. Now, it's always the hardest thing to do. Always remember that when you get this insane fear in the markets, when you get so, where your stomach is like wound in knots because you see things falling in integers, not just pennies, but in dollar increments or $100 increments or $1,000 increments in the crypto market sometimes. That is when you actually have to say, shut off your emotional brain and you think logically. And logic can tell you, and the VIX can help guide you in that way. Now, if the VIX is in this range now, no, it doesn't really tell us much, right? So the VIX, again, if it probably continues to come back in, I would guess the markets are due for a little technical bounce, assuming nothing crazy erupts like Middle East stuff overnight or anything like that. But in general, once you get back in the 20s, you don't have a firm direction either way. The VIX could pop back in the 30s or could go back to the teens, and you don't really have an edge in that respect. All right, so let's go on to a couple other charts. The S&P 500, I want to show the SPY here. Again, if we flip over to this chart on the SPY, which is the S&P, there's a clear trend break. All right, so what does that mean? Well, as I said you could get a bounce now, right? In fact, you could see this little pivot point right here. We actually tagged this little high right there. And let me zoom in on that so we can see that a little closer here. See this little high right there? So that was the low of today, and you got a little bounce. So, you could go a tiny bit lower to the gap fill, but in general, I would expect a bounce where we trade up just a little bit, right? Let me do my arrows so you guys can kind of be guided. This is generally what I would expect. And then I would expect the next leg down like that. So I think you get reprieves here where buy the dippers eventually feel gutsy enough to come out of the woodwork and buy. And, you get bounces like on NVIDIA bouncing back into the low 100s, for instance. But eventually, in my opinion, I think ultimately we're headed a lot lower in this market. So for me, yeah, I'm a buyer and I did a lot of buying today. I also did a lot of profit taking in shorts as well as in long positions we picked up this morning. But I'm also saying, okay, the stuff that I'm buying now, I'm not getting married to it. I'm holding it for a short amount of time and then unloading it when I make 10, 15% on the bounce. NASDAQ 100, take a look, guys. This tells me the NASDAQ got very close to or is at a short-term bottom for a bounce. Notice the gap fill. Here's an upsloping trend line as well. So upsloping trend line connecting these lows right through low to low and right to here. And you kind of kissed it. I would have preferred a hit, but that's okay. Can't have everything I want. But notice how these two lines are virtually at the same spot. That tells me there is a good technical level there. All right. So again, very close to a bounce on the NASDAQ, which tells us mega cap could be near a bounce. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that notice we're in a bigger channel, right? So this is a bigger channel, which tells us that a bounce likely eventually sells off. And if I move this over, let's just game this out. So how would this ultimately play out? Bear with me as I get my arrow. So let's say we get a small bounce like this, and then eventually a move leg down here. So you'll go lower. It's just a matter of catching and taking profits on a solid bounce in the markets. All right, so just kind of giving you guys an idea. This is what I expect. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, of course. I am only a trader, and I do have a fair amount of experience, but I've been wrong plenty of times before. All right, looking at the NVIDIA chart, take a look at where NVIDIA opened today, right around $91 a share. And look at this was a perfect 50% Fibonacci retrace from this low, which started this big move to the upside, and this high. So do a fib retrace from there to there, and you get the low today. You also had a little flat top right here and a little technical flat top there. So listen, NVIDIA actually held a lot of its bounces, was still down 6.3%, but it would not shock me. Same kind of deal. I think NVIDIA could bounce back to, let's say, 115 or so before that next leg comes in. What'll be interesting to see is they report earnings, I think, in like 3 weeks or so. It'll be really interesting now at these levels to see what those earnings are when they are reported. Some of my favorite stocks down here, take a look at Micron, guys. Micron holding on to that level, filled this gap as well. A lot of support on Micron down here. Micron hasn't reported earnings yet either and will in the not too distant future. But really, this is a very intriguing level of support on Micron. If you look at the fall on this thing, this is actually one of my favorite longs right now. The fall, 45% fall since basically July 18th. That's an incredible fall and a lot of technical support all in this range, right? I mean, I could literally drag this line out all the way over to here as well. Now, it's not to say it can't go lower, but probabilities are starting to shift that we should see some sort of snapback. My general short-term target would be back to 101.66, this gap fill. That would just be a minor resistance. Really, if you're looking for a better target zone, it would be right in here, right? A retrace. You can see how on the way down, here's a low. And then notice how when it came in here, look at how the chart behaved. It kind of stopped and went sideways and then broke down. That's telling you there's a level there that will be resistance on the way back up. So I think maybe back to 108 on Micron would make a lot of sense in this situation. All right, let's go to a couple others here. Apple today. We know that Warren Buffett unloaded a huge chunk, half of his position. I do want to just point out, and by the way, I was dead on. Remember this morning, for those of you that watched the game plan, I literally was pounding my feet and like stamping my feet saying, guys, I'm buying, I'm buying, I'm buying. And by the way, that turned out to be amazingly profitable to be a buyer early in the day here. But the point is that you had so many overreactions in the market. One of them was Apple. So Warren Buffett had a massive, like it would be the equivalent of me in $1 million portfolio having like 3/4 of my position of my portfolio in Apple. I mean, that's basically what he was doing. He was so over leveraged, not over, he wasn't using leverage, don't get me wrong, but he was so overdone in Apple that after it ran 25-30%, it was just smart for him to take half off the table, right? I mean, it's something that I preach to everyone. Like, it's common sense. Good investors do it. They take half off the table, and then they obviously can buy if it pulls back, or they just can ride the rest, which is basically a freebie at that time. So I think that investors overreacted on this Apple news a little bit. He still has $84 billion in Apple. That's a massive position still, in terms of his other positions in various stocks. All right. So that was that news there. And again, you see that Apple did open lower. Look at, by the way, on a technical basis where Apple opened right into this area right here. Right. So see this little flat top right there. I don't know if it's a fib retrace. I always love to check that out. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It's always more beneficial when it is. Let me see here. No, it doesn't look well. The 50 was just a 50% fib retrace was just above that level. So yeah, I mean, it was right in that zone between 200 and 197. So within $3 there. And either way, it had a huge bounce on that chart. All right, flipping over to Bitcoin, guys. Let's look at BTC here. BTC, amazing, guys. And again, this is how powerful charts are. I gave you this pivot line. I said, again, if it was above, it was bullish. Once it broke, if it had a daily close below, watch out below. There's your daily close below, and look at the fall that it had. It went literally from 61,400 to 49,000. All right. Now it has bounced. It's a good bounce. This isn't a bottoming tail, though. I like the fact that it's regaining some of these support levels, though. You have this area here. It kissed this level here. So I do think you're likely going to get more upside on Bitcoin here in the near term. And again, if you're in my Smart Money crypto service at Verified Investing, you know that I went long like crazy on so many of these cryptos that were getting flushed, Avalanche and, Near and Cardano and Ethereum and all these. Speaking of which, we can look at Ethereum real quick. And Ethereum, beautiful bounce here as well. By the way, this hit a perfect trend line. Pivot high right through these lows here. See that right there? And then look at the low today. Didn't hit this. I would have almost preferred it to hit this just because it would have been like two levels at once getting hit. But still very, very cool in that respect of it hitting that level and getting a good bounce. Where would Ethereum make sense to bounce back to? The scene of the crime, right? You guys have heard me say that before. Scene of the crime. Let's take a look at that. If we flip over here, we get my arrow. The logical bounce back would be back to this trend line right here. And then we have to see, does it pull back? Does it break through? I don't know, but this will be resistance. Right around 3,000 would be your logical target on that. Gold today, guys, taking a look at gold. Nice move down on gold. Although, again, notice how gold was down a lot more early in the day and then kind of came back. And that's very gold-esque. When there's fear in the market, people sell, and then they don't even think about it. They just sell everything, right? We saw it during COVID. And so I think that was what was going on this morning. And then by this afternoon, smart money was starting to say, hey, buy gold. Because if we're going into a recession, if the Nikkei is in trouble, if Japan's in trouble, if all of these things are going on, it makes a lot of sense that you probably will have a scenario where, we're in for a intriguing potential rally higher on gold, especially with the money printing starting up quite a bit here. By the way, I'm just taking note here. I'm seeing the semiconductors after hours getting a surge here. Interesting. Hang on one second. I got to jump over to the SMH here and just do a quick check here. Extended hours. Yeah, that's a little bit of an uptick. It's not a huge uptick. I'm also seeing Micron go up as well. Micron catching a little bit. Let's look at NVIDIA. Yeah, NVIDIA's caught a little bit in the after hours too. These are very minor bids, but nonetheless, it is catching my eye that we are starting to see a little bit of a move up on some of these things here in the after hours. By the way, I think Palantir reported after the bell today. Let me take a quick look at that PLTR. That's kind of an A. Oh, yeah, look at that AI play. Maybe that's why. So you're seeing Palantir surging on the back of earnings today, guys. And again, Palantir, beautiful little move here to the upside. And that is likely helping the case for some of these chip stocks doing better than AI. There's a positive narrative on AI right now, and that looks like it's a positive. By the way, I want to highlight Intel. I'm a big fan of Intel down in this range, guys. Take a look at this trend line. If we go to the weekly chart, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit today, but I just remembered Intel and then I saw what was going on. Pivot low from 2011, pivot low from 2011, pivot low from 2012. We just hit it today. And then if we look at this, you almost got a little micro bottoming tail on the chart here. In fact, I'd have to do the measurements, but it might be a little bottoming tail there. Either way, the one thing when I see stocks like this, good quality companies that have just faltered and kind of shot themselves in the foot, if you will, it reminds me of activist investor opportunity. And so activist investors, where they come in and they take a big stake in it, the stock usually pops up because you got the activists trying to work with the company to do better. There's a lot of money to be made. So just be on the lookout for that over the next couple months. At these levels on Intel, it makes sense that an activist investor might get involved. All right, let's go back to a couple other things. Let's look at silver real quick. Silver got hammered. Again, remember, silver was hovering below the pivot line, the bullish bearish pivot line, and therefore going to the downside was to be expected. It kissed a little support here. I think it could go a little bit lower, but it's getting really attractive down in this range. Oil today, good bounce on oil off the low, still a small down day, but you might get a little mini bottoming tail here on oil. So it looks like it's trying to hold on to this bigger wedge pattern. If it's able to put in a bottoming tail with this wedge pattern, I think you actually get a reprieve and get a bounce in the chart of oil here. Just a short-term bounce, though. Natural gas, guys, you know I love my fibs. Today, we officially pierced the 786 Fibonacci from this low to this high right there, and actually it recovered pretty well. Again, I continue to be bullish on natural gas here. It is way overdone into some major support. Natural gas, again, known as the widowmaker, can do anything it wants at any time, and I've been out of the money plenty of times on it, so just be aware of that. But nonetheless, to me, it does look very attractive down here for a potential long trade. All right. HIMS reported after the bell here. We could take a look at that real quick here, guys. Again, this isn't a big market cap company. Looks like it's down slightly. Lucid reported here. Lucid's up slightly there as well. So those, again, were pretty much Palantir's the big name, obviously. Palantir's the big one there. But other than that, there's not a whole lot else that I'm seeing that's of interest. Actually, Yum China. Let's look at Yum China. Yum C here. That's up a little bit after hours on earnings. And then if we look at CSX, which is a railroad stock, that's also upticking a little bit. By the way, Celsius reports tomorrow. Very curious on this one, guys, because it's been beaten down so much. Take a look. I did some annotations on this chart. Lots of support here. It hit it at $40 and even more support at 36. So with earnings tomorrow, this is a big level. It's down from almost $100 down to $40. That, to be honest, might be due for a bounce on earnings. We'll see what those earnings are tomorrow morning. All right, guys, I got to get back to the trading floor here and just keep an eye on everything that's going on in the after hours. I'm keeping an eye out of the corner of my eye on my other screens here. But as always, thank you so much for joining here and watching Trading the Close. As always, folks, I'm going to do my best to give you hardcore technical analysis, data-driven analysis, and give you the honest facts, right? That's what it's all about. Go to the narratives from mainstream media, go to social media for the hype. Verified investing, all about the data. Have a good one, guys. Talk to you soon.